Walking through the city, lights all aglow. Everybody's got a story to show. Wheels keep spinning, streets overflow. Hustle never stops, we're in the flow. Skylines high like our dreams in the air. Concrete jungle, we got flair. Rhythm of the night, we don't care. Underneath the stars we breathe rare. In this urban jungle we're alive. Heartbeats echo as we strive. Dreams collide where the streets survive. Together we'll thrive, side by side. Echoes of the past linger near. Future calls, we face it with no fear. Every corner tells a tale so clear. In the city, we chase what we hold dear. Shadows and whispers blend in the night. City's pulse beats with all its might. Lost in the chaos, but it feels right. We rise above, reach new heights. In this urban jungle, we're alive. Heartbeats echo as we strive. Dreams collide where the streets survive. Together we'll thrive, side by side.
And welcome to tonight's Order Paper podcast. How are you again this week, Laura?
This week was wild.
Oh, I know. I mean, put it this way. Who drinks a trim oat latte? I can tell you right now, I cannot buy trim oat trim oat milk in New Zealand or on the international market. I have more chances of buying canned cream cheese or coconut cream soft serve mix than I am to buy trim oat milk.
Do oats even have fat in them that you can trim off?
I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't even know how you'd make it trim, considering how they make cow's milk trim is by doing that. Now, just before we go and get to the fun part of that, let's have an announcement from the company director of Being Here Limited wearing his Nicky No Boats shirt.
Ah, yes.
Hey everybody. Now, you may have known this week that our Prime Minister has said to Simon Bridges that his favourite coffee is the trim oat latte. Well, unfortunately, we were unable to provide Prime Minister Christopher Luxon that today. However, if you come to Being Here, we've got some brilliant deals. If you'd like to have the Prime Minister's trim latte, we can do that here with the good old trim cow's milk, supporting our dairy farmers of New Zealand. And if you'd like to be a bit of an alternative one, such as if you're in the vegan crowd, you can get the Prime Minister's oat latte made with oat milk from a good company that knows how to make good alternative milk. Got to admit it is Aussie made, but I don't think we have any New Zealand made oat milk in New Zealand at this point. Christopher, you can sit down there and get your agricultural minister to sit there and say we get oat milk making to New Zealand. These two coffees will be available here at Being Here at Newtown Market all day today and will remain available on our menu for the remainder existence of this business trading. Thank you for that, and we'll look forward to making either your Prime Minister's trim latte or Prime Minister's oat latte today and onwards in the future. Have a great day.
I got an idea. Could you mix the two together? Then you can have oat milk.
Well, you could do that with. There is the potential for cross contamination with dairy and non-dairy, but
Extra
that is
special.
completely plausible that you could tip half trim milk and then half oat milk, but then it wouldn't be vegan. Doing that. Now, I'd like to thank my friend Craig Chappell from the Kilburnie branch of the Kingdom of Jehovah's Witnesses, who is a member of the public who doesn't participate in voting, for filming that for me yesterday morning at Newtown Market. Craig, thank you for doing that, and thank you for providing us some political funniness and dose to it, even though I know you do not participate in our democratic process.
10 out of 10 for camera work.
Yeah. No, Craig is really good, and he understands the processes of why that was done on there. We might actually have another person from the Kilburnie branch of the Jehovah's Witnesses who might actually start watching our content.
Who are these Jehovah's Witness cinematographers that you know about?
So at Newtown Market, the Jehovah's Witnesses have been next door to me forever. And they're brilliant people. They buy coffee with me every week and that sort of thing. And they're great people. I mean, it's like people sit there and I stop at, if I see them in other places, I sit there and stop at them. One of the people who is there, one of them is a guy called Robin King. Robin King's brother was Colin King, the MP for Kaikoura, who got shafted after he did, 8.5 years as an MP and got shafted out of renomination.
Okay.
So things you find out, and there's also another one there called Jonathan, who's a doctor in his professional life, and he would love to know how these American politicians would like to tell him how to replant an ectopic pregnancy because it's impossible to do.
Beyond me, I'm not a gynecologist. I don't know, but that would be a literal miracle if you could do that.
I think it's a miracle that probably doesn't really exist.
No.
So I thought that could be a bit of a laugh to kick off the start of the show. I mean, and I have to be honest, I had to choose the right shirt to wear to sit there and do that video. And I'm not sure if Luxon will actually turn up to Newtown Market to do it. I mean, to be honest, I'm in a green seat.
Could you tempt Julianne Gentle to buy one?
Oh, see, that won't be a problem. Julian will be very easy to buy coffee. I mean, she's bought how many coffees off me over the period of time before she became an elected MP and since being one. It's that part is pretty much solid. I mean, put it this way: I see Mike Butterick more likely buying coffee off me than Christopher Luxon at Wings Over Wairarapa. And that's if I actually go again, because they actually really screwed up the last time I went there. And for Stacey who's in there, it's not the one we got COVID at, it was the next one. The one where basically they wanted to turn off the generator power on us.
Yep.
Yeah.
How are you supposed to make coffee without power? You tell me.
Well, no. It was to do with the refrigeration for all the storeholders.
Oh, hell's bells.
Yeah, it's and your volume's a little bit low, but we can I can turn that up on there and see if that temporarily boosts it. So you're at 119% now.
Okay, so how am I now? Can everyone hear me?
I hope so.
Kiwi Skirt, give me a sign. How
Probably.
loud am I?
Yes, I do know that, Blake. I do know that some members of Jehovah's Witness do vote. I do know that. When I went and voted for my first time, oh my God, there was one person I knew who was Jehovah's Witness voting who I went to college with. Yeah. So.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Cool. I can be heard. Sweet.
Yep. Okay. So let's kick off with the Offshore Renewable Energy Bill, and let's kick off with the. Is he still the Minister of Energy? At the time the bill was done, he was the Minister of Energy, Simeon Brown.
Published on the authority of the House can be found on the Parliament website. Honourable Simeon Brown.
I move that the Offshore Renewable Energy Bill be now read for a first time. I nominate the Transport and Infrastructure Committee to consider the bill. Mr Speaker, this bill delivers on a commitment to put a regulatory regime in place for offshore renewable energy as part of the government's Electrify New Zealand plan. Offshore wind is the most developed offshore renewable energy technology, and New Zealand has world-class offshore wind resources with some of the highest capacity factors in the world. New Zealand currently does not have a regulatory regime for offshore renewable energy, and this bill delivers that regulatory regime so we can unlock the potential that offshore renewable energy has for New Zealand. This bill establishes new permitting regimes for all forms of offshore renewable energy, including wind, wave and tidal. The permitting regime aims to provide greater certainty to potential developers to invest in offshore renewable energy developments and allows the selection of developments that best meet New Zealand's interests. The bill also provides for the management of risks to the Crown and the public. Establishing a regime is an important step that will give investors the confidence to construct generation assets to help power New Zealand's increasing electrified economy. This bill will help us do that. This bill introduces 2 dedicated offshore renewable energy permits. First, feasibility permits, which will give developers greater certainty to undertake feasibility studies in specified areas. It will give the holder the right to apply for relevant resource or marine consents in that area, and the exclusive ability to apply for a commercial permit to build and operate offshore renewable energy infrastructure in that area. Secondly, it allows for commercial permits. A commercial permit must be obtained before construction begins and provides assurance that the project is ready to progress to construction. It will complement the environmental consents and other approvals required to build and operate offshore renewable energy infrastructure. The bill limits the ability for developers to land bank certain areas, or not that it's necessarily land, but or impede other developments. Permits will have use it or lose it provisions, meaning if a project fails to start or progress, the area can be made available to other developers. Feasibility permit applications will be assessed on a comparative basis and awarded to the projects that are most likely to deliver the most benefits for New Zealanders. Applicants will need to meet minimum eligibility thresholds and establish that they have the technical and financial capability to install, operate, maintain and to decommission the proposed infrastructure. The Minister for Energy will consider feasibility permit applications and must have regard to any significant risk to national security or public order posed by the applicant, the impact on treaty settlements, the applicant's approach to managing existing rights and interests in the area, and the applicant's compliance record in New Zealand and internationally. Feasibility permit holders will be able to apply for commercial permits whenever they are ready to do so. The commercial permit process will provide assurance that the project is ready to progress to construction. The Minister for Energy will consider commercial permit applications and must have regard to readiness to carry out the proposed development, compliance with requirements in the legislation and conditions of the applicant's feasibility permit, and the applicant's ability to put in place an acceptable financial security arrangement. It is important that people can have their say on potential developments, and there will be an opportunity to do this before the Minister for Energy decides to grant feasibility permits. Feasibility permit applications will be publicly notified, and any person who wishes to make a submission will have a reasonable opportunity to do so. Applicants for feasibility and commercial permits will be required to consult with relevant iwi and hapu ahead of submitting their applicants, and the Minister for Energy must also consult those iwi and hapu before granting any permit. Provisions in the bill relating to upholding treaty settlements and associated rights and interests will align with those in the fast-track approvals legislation, which was passed earlier today. We want to ensure that offshore renewable energy infrastructure does not become a significant financial risk to the Crown. The bill requires all permit holders and owners of related transmission infrastructure to decommission their offshore renewable energy infrastructure at the end of its life. The bill also requires financial security arrangements to be put in place and maintained to cover the cost of the Crown in the event that permit holders or infrastructure owners fail to meet their obligations to decommission. This is consistent with standard practice internationally. Other protections of the bill include the ability of safety zones to protect the infrastructure and people from intentional or accidental harm. The bill enables the administration, monitoring and enforcement of the regime and is intended the Ministry of Business, Innovations and Employment undertake this role. The bill also includes a range of offences and penalties for breaches of the regime, ranging from $3,000 to $10 million fines through to permit revocation or imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years. Significant fines and penalties were considered necessary in certain circumstances to provide an effective deterrent given the financial capability of likely permit holders. The bill includes regulation making powers to set out procedural and implementation matters, such as additional matters the Minister must have regard to when determining whether to grant a permit and the provision of information. The powers include the ability to set fees and levies to recover the costs of the regulator, and I intend to progress feasibility and permit and cost recovery regulations at the same time as the bill progresses through the House. Mr. Speaker, the policy proposals in this bill have been developed with input from industry and stakeholders with 2 rounds of public consultation. Ultimately, no decisions by Cabinet had been made prior to this government coming to power, and so this government has had to make those decisions, draft the legislation, and now bring this legislation to the House. I'm pleased that we've been able to do that in our first year in government, to bring this legislation to the House so we can enable an offshore renewable energy regime here in New Zealand to unlock the significant potential that exists in our oceans surrounding our country, and critically importantly, unlock that electricity which will help power our country and our economy out into the future, critically important to meeting our net zero 2050 target. The proposed regime borrows the best from more mature regimes such as in the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Denmark and Australia, and is adapted to suit here in New Zealand. This government is committed to enabling offshore renewable energy, and it is intended for the offshore renewable energy regime to be placed by mid-2025 and the first feasibility permit application round to be opened in late 2025. I commend this bill to the House.
That sounds like a somewhat sensible bill. I just hope it's not for a wind farm that may have bolted because of, was it deep sea mining?
Yeah, so this is basically a carbon copy. It was because I did some basic reading of comparing the bills. This is just basically a carbon copy of the Crown Minerals Act 1991. It's got similar provisions, like the Crown Minerals Act also includes a use it or lose it provision when it comes to exploration permits. So they've made a similar. There's a similar clause in this bill when it comes to feasibility permits.
God, they need to sit there and put something similar into the RMA so Johnson Moore doesn't have 2 resource consent application slaps on them.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get on to Megan Woods.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to take a call on the Offshore Renewable Energy Bill and very pleased to see it come to the House. Labor will be supporting this bill. This is work that I think continues very much the work that was begun by our government. The 2 consultation rounds that the Minister referred to, of course, were consultation rounds that were initiated by our government. So it is pleasing to see that this work has appeared this year. The intention, of course, was to have a regulatory regime up and running this year, but it is pleasing to see that it has had some progress. But, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I will put on the table that Labor wants to see is some increased momentum around this work. We have already seen one significant international investor leave New Zealand, partly because of lack of momentum, also because of decisions with the Fast Track Bill around competing interests. So, Mr. Speaker, putting on the table that while Labor supports the bill, we do think there is far more urgency that the government could bring to this work. New Zealand undoubtedly has some of the best offshore wind resources in the world. I know, meeting with the International Wind Energy Council, they described the resources that they were in New Zealand as some of the best that they had seen. So, Mr. Speaker, when we came to think about how it is that we would put together a consenting regime, we looked around the world for best examples. We looked at places like Scotland, who had put together a sophisticated regime that brought community in, and very much about how their engagement with community worked very well. One of the other things that we looked to regimes where it had enabled the development, not just the seabed banking of permits to block out competitors, as we've seen in other jurisdictions such as Japan. So how it is that we could facilitate not only the concept, but the building of it. And, Mr. Speaker, for us, there were several key points we looked at, and what we will be looking at through the Select Committee stage of this legislation. One is around the pace. What can we do to pick up the pace? We've already lost momentum with this government not progressing the work on the original timeline, so what can we do to pick that up? I'm pleased to see that there is an attempt to have alignment with Australia. The reality is, much of the international capital that will be attracted is looking for Australasian investment opportunities. So we will be looking to see how that alignment, not only with Australia, but within the Asia-Pacific region looks. One of the critical components is use it or lose it clauses. And are these strong enough in not having loopholes? Because what we have seen in other jurisdictions such as Japan is someone will apply for permits without the intention of ever building offshore wind, but it is an attempt to block out competitors, and something we have to ensure our regime doesn't have. We need to see a benefit to New Zealand. But, Mr. Speaker, one of the fundamental issues that has always sat at the core of this, and what we cannot borrow from international regimes, is getting our treaty partnerships right. How is it that we're going to engage with mana whenua? What is the role for mana whenua? What are the opportunities in terms of the 21st century energy system that is different than the 20th century energy system, oil and gas exploration in particular, that has seen an exploitative model where mana whenua have been a tick box exercise rather than commercial players sitting at the table and there actually being good commercial opportunities. And, Mr. Speaker, at Select Committee, Labor will be ensuring that we have enduring provisions with this bill to make sure that we have this right. Because, Mr. Speaker, what international capital coming to New Zealand realises, that I don't think this government does, that unless you get this right, we will tie up offshore wind in the courts for years. This is an absolutely critical component of us making sure that we can get it right. Other things we'll be looking at Select Committee are the royalties regime, also price stabilisation, which we're seeing in other parts of the world. Competing uses, we've already seen blue folk leave New Zealand shores because of decisions this government has made. What are we doing in terms of planning to make sure that we're not crowding out renewable energy? So, Mr. Speaker, while we're supporting this and are pleased to support this bill to Select Committee, there are many areas, it is a reasonably complex piece of legislation, and areas where we'll be seeking to work with the government to make sure we have the best regime for New Zealand.
I'm really curious about because I tried looking up that case in Japan that she was referring to. I couldn't find it. So I would love to know what she's referring to because that would be really interesting. But yeah, I found that a lot of the questions that she asked are more like select committee questions, stuff that you'd nut out in the select committee.
Yeah, that's usually where you tend to iron out the cracks in the bill, especially if you've got poorly written ones.
Mm-hmm.
Usually members' bills, that tends to be where they tend to make the big changes, are at Select Committee. Okay, let's go for Scott Willis.
Waiting for the National Policy Statement for Renewable Electricity Generation, which was due in June this year. But finally, at last, here comes the Offshore Renewable Energy Bill. And we do need legislation to govern the construction, operation and decommissioning of offshore renewable energy developments. So we will support this bill to Select Committee because we want a rich and thoughtful examination of this bill. The irony The irony, however, is that National's Electrify New Zealand plan is now so far off track, in no small measure due to reneging on the promise to increase demand by supplying 9,000 EV charging points, and its failure to deliver the National Policy Statement for Renewable Electricity Generation in June, and its one-eyed fixation on fast-tracking coal mines, gold mines and seabed mining. So seabed mining is, of course, incompatible with offshore wind development, and that's why Blue Float sailed away. Seabed mining will significantly disrupt the seafloor, up to a depth of 11 metres, and Blue Float said offshore wind turbines and electrical cables could not be constructed in the same location as an active seabed mining operation, resulting in the unavailability of that zone for offshore wind generation for the duration of mining activities. And we've seen a request to make those mining activities a 35-year existence. Copenhagen infrastructure partners, in partnership with the New Zealand Super Fund, are still hanging on, but we don't know for how long. And that's an early taste of the disaster that is the fast-track legislation, and it's no wonder that there are protests. Here in the House, it's no wonder that multinationals are leaving. And meanwhile, we in the Greens do have many questions about offshore wind, and we want to have that conversation. Our priority is onshore wind and solar and geothermal, simply because it is faster, cheaper, less resource-intensive and with fewer environmental impacts than offshore wind, and it can also be located close to where there is demand and provides for ease of maintenance. What we like in this bill, however, are the provisions around decommissioning, particularly the financial security obligations to ensure that the decommissioning of offshore renewable energy infrastructure occurs at the expense of the permit holder and owners of related transmission infrastructure. And there are other positives, such as safety zones. However, we do want to know how necessary this is and how it will be managed, as other offshore wind developments support local businesses, like boat operators, local guides, providing an alternative source of income and a diversified tourism offer. The two-stage permitting regime, feasibility first, followed by, if appropriate, commercial permits, is also a positive. What needs greater clarity, however, is how te reti obligations will be met and what is the process to co-develop with Māori the national guidance and legislation, because it appears that this legislation hasn't gone through this process and only intends to consult with Māori groups before granting any permit, and consultation is very different to co-development. Meanwhile, the RIS notes that tangata whenua, iwi and hapu have significant rights and interests in the marine area, including recognised customary interests, cultural and economic interests, etc. And we want to see these interests upheld. And we're also concerned that the existing RMA and Exclusive Economic Zone Act consenting environmental assessment regimes are not robust or effective enough at protecting marine ecosystems or mammals. And what about other technologies such as tidal generation? So there are a number of questions. There's another big question that we want to see at Select Committee about port infrastructure to host offshore wind developments and connecting offshore wind and energy to onshore connection points. The question of who pays. Will the taxpayer be expected to foot the bill, or will they do it? And in parallel, will we have a reinvention of the electricity market to provide longer-term hedge contracts? Mr. Speaker, we will support this bill to Select Committee because we want a rich and thoughtful examination. Thank you.
Yeah, so Scott is right. I checked the claims that he made. So he claimed that Blue Float said that offshore wind turbines and electrical cables cannot be constructed in the same location as an active seabed mining operation. Yeah, that is correct. That is one of the reasons why they left. And that was actually put in a briefing paper to government ministers. And it wasn't just Blue Float Energy. It was also the Elemental Group, Taranaki Offshore Partnership, Sumitomo Corporation and Parkwind. So, yeah, a seabed mining project is expected to significantly disrupt the seabed floor up to a depth of 11 metres. Offshore wind turbines and electrical cables could not be constructed in the same location as an active seabed mining operation, resulting in the unavailability of that zone for offshore wind generation for the duration of mining activities. So, yeah, so you can't have two things in the same area. It won't work.
I mean, it's also like there's something not on the same topic, but deals with electrical cables. There's a section of the Cook Strait you cannot actually anchor. And it's to do with the Cook Strait electricity cables.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not the only thing. It also, a minor thing that comes with that is the fact that you cannot necessarily anchor your boat in the area when you're near a was it offshore wind turbine.
Yeah,
little things to sit there and know. Now let's sit there and see what comes from ACT.
Party support this bill. We love innovation. The Offshore Renewable Energy Bill has got the right framework in place, including the construction, operation and decommissioning. I commend this bill to the House.
Jamie.
Well, that was very quick there, Laura. Thanks for a seat warmer speech that I did not pick up on.
Hey, I don't claim her. She's her own Laura. I don't. She's not part of my group of Lauras. That's a partial strike. That's worthy of a.
Look, Laura McCure, I thought her last name was Trask. Has she got married or something?
I don't know, and I don't really care.
Yeah, no.
That was a seat warmer speech, so it's like I don't care. If you don't care about making a proper speech, then I don't care about what you have to say.
Oh, she was previously known as Laura Trask. Oh, okay, so she may have recently got married
Or divorced.
or something.
I don't know.
Oh, she contested her election under her maiden name.
Ah.
Oh, and now she's decided to use her married name on there.
Okay.
Oh, well, that's her choice. I mean, you know.
Very, very cool, Laura. Thanks. Keep that seat warm.
Yep. Jamie Arbuckle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to support the Offshore Renewable Energy Bill. And, Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity earlier in the year to travel to Taranaki and have a look at the opportunity offshore wind has the potential for the New Zealand energy sector. And it is really exciting to see what could actually be done. This bill sets up the legislative way it can be governed. It's around the construction of the renewable wind, especially the turbines, and when you look at how large some of those turbines are and the effort that it would actually take to even put one of those into the water, but these are on a scale that is huge. And just to learn about that, the actual operation of the turbines, the decommissioning side of it as well is something that's really important and is taken care of in this bill. It's also about the investment and the potential developers out there, actually giving them some certainty in actually the investment that's required. So this bill gives that framework to be put that in place. It also is about doubling renewable energy by 2050, and that's the goal of this government. So this goes as another one of those options, and it's only one part of that puzzle is the renewable energy sector, and especially the offshore wind. So on that, Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Even though it was short, it actually had a lot more guts to it.
Well, he just basically said what Simeon Brown said.
Yeah.
It's like thanks, Jamie. It's just copy and paste.
Yeah. But hey, you know, at least there were more words with it.
Yeah, he did bring more words, so that's good.
Yeah. Oh, let's get to Debbie Narua Packer.
Yep.
In standing to speak to this bill, I guess it's one of those situations we've got more questions than answers and look forward to what it is that comes out of the Select Committee. The first question that we have is, what is this problem this particular bill solving or resolving? And is it going to help address the energy security issue that we have in Aotearoa? Is it going to address significantly the energy inequity issue that we have in Aotearoa? Is there benefit for Aotearoa, for our businesses, for our partnerships, as Te Tiriti, as claims and states? Or are we going to be once again in offshore companies that are going to be helping to craft this bill? It's going to be designed to suit them more than anyone else. Energy will be exported, the price is exported and controlled offshore. So I guess the question as we were caucusing this is, what is it changing? And the other part of it is it addressing the climate issues? Will it lower emissions? Is it going to put us forward truly in using the full sense of the word renewable, noting that turbines last approximately 15 to 17 years offshore? And that when they are devolved, that it becomes effectively an urupa of turbines in our ocean. And respecting that, we did see the decommissioning clause. We live in Taranaki with the decommissioning and have effectively seen its failings, and as taxpayers had to pay for millions of dollars for the clean-up of those failings. So is this bill also going to look at business? And I think the bill's made it really clear that it is going to be investor-led, investor-focused. So that being the case, then how do we make sure that those investors are our own? How do we make sure, unlike what we saw in the nationalisation of all the minerals, the Crown Minerals Act, that it's been really difficult for Māori, for even New Zealand companies to be able to become part of the oil and mineral sector? And I say that conservatively because if we are going to go down this path, we first and foremost must look and think about our own nationhood. And our own nationhood has a history, pre-nationalisation, and the recognition of tangata whenua rights, and the recognition, as Y Claims 796 and 852 spoke about. And if we go back to looking at some of the things that I think Margaret Wilson made a statement in 2000 that the government's reaffirmed policy that Crown Minerals, including petroleum, are owned and managed in national interest, will not be included in a lot of the Taranaki settlement claims. She did make a commitment, though, that the government will explore ways to address the Crown's contemporary obligations to Māori under the treaty with regard to natural resources. Now, this is an opportunity for the nationhood and the well-being of Aotearoa to be discussed and realised with those Taranaki iwi that had to forego the historical grievances in the Crown mineral space and how that would indeed be put into effect in a way that is best for all of Aotearoa. And I would welcome hearing some of this, again, as I said, in the select committee stage. Are we looking to transition and do something radically different in the energy space for the betterment of all in New Zealand? Or are we going to open up for the corporate entities that have come in the name of renewable energy, who will then take everything offshore and make it just as expensive for our businesses, for our communities and our families to be able to live in Aotearoa? And these are some of the questions that, with all honesty, we haven't landed with the answers in this bill, because unfortunately we do have a cynical view of some of the way that this government has taken energy and big corporate bias. And so we've seen the fast track today, third reading, we've seen the RMA first reading, we've seen this particular bill's first reading, and nowhere are we seeing a different approach where in fact there is an opening up of what could be the protection of Māori, iwi, hapu investments with this government, and for the protection of all citizens of Aotearoa to be able to afford to have good, sustainable energy options. So those are some of the questions that we have that we look forward to the next phase of this bill. Kia ora.
Well, that raises some good points there that Debbie did bring up about the decommissioning of the Tui oil field that did not properly happen.
Yeah, she asks a lot of great questions, and I don't have any answers for her.
Yeah,
Thankfully, I don't have to come up with the answers. That's National's job. But
yeah.
Now I can answer one of her questions, and she'd probably say to me, "Thanks, Captain Obvious." But one of the key functions of the bill is to create decommissioning and financial security obligations to ensure the decommissioning of offshore renewable energy infrastructure occurs at the expense of the permit holders and owners of related transmission infrastructure. So there you go. So at least we've got that now in legislation. But yeah, the Tui oil field decommissioning project, that was fucked, man.
The big thing that could be something that could be part of the permit holder is to actually put a proportion of the decommissioning costs to the state in trust. So when decommissioning happens, the funds can be released. If there is a change in ownership of the permit holder, the permit, it's not like you've sold your permit off to someone and then you've left them with the bill to sit there and do the cleanup, that sort of thing there. So maybe that's where the decommission costs could be put, say, into trust. Yep. And so that at least at the end of it, there is funds there. I mean, you one thing I hate is privatise the gain, socialise the losses, or socialise the negative consequences. And that should hopefully reduce some of that from actually happening.
A big old bond. I like that.
Exactly, bond. Or you can actually have it where it's like, a requirement each year is to pay money into, say, that bond as part of the operating costs. I don't agree with having that cost at the start of the project, but could be part of the requirement to have that permit is to pay that ongoing cost into a bond for decommissioning at the end, and have that where it actually where you can change things in there. I can sit there and do it. And I noticed there's some very comments going about Laura, was it McClure?
Not me.
Laura Trust's name. There's a lot of people sitting there going through there. I can tell you one politician who was very honest about it. Her name was called Fetatura Cartney. And then when she got married, she chucked Dennis's last name Sullivan on the end. And then everyone knew who is Fetatura Cartney Sullivan. But maybe, it does feel a bit like Laura who?
Yeah.
And to be honest, I looked 2 weeks ago on the Social Services Select Committee. It was Trask on then. So she's only just told Parliament that she would like to go by her married name.
Yeah, I mean, personally, here's my opinion on it. I don't really care.
Yeah. yeah, I know.
It's like, oh, okay, is it going to impact the country? No, so I don't really care.
But it's interesting to mention the part is it's about being honest.
Yep.
It's an honesty thing or something like that. It's actually quite intriguing on that basis. But then, to be honest, I've always been professionally known as Sam Summers. I've never been known as my legal name as Samuel Summers.
Yeah.
So, and I'll probably say the same as with Sam Uffendale.
Yeah, it's just like, I've got bigger things to worry about than someone's last.
Now, here's a new segment, because I hate Seat Warmer speeches, but we need to expose them.
Yep.
So let's kick off for our first Seat Warmers compilation.
Grant McCullum. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to support and speak on this very important bill. As part of our policy of electrifying New Zealand, we believe in getting on with doing things, which is what we're going to do, and I commend this bill to the House.
Nice.
Tom Rutherford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to stand in support of the Offshore Renewable Energy Bill, which establishes a legislative regime to govern the construction, operation and decommissioning of offshore renewable energy. As a member of Transport and Infrastructure Select Committee, I'm looking forward to consultation and public submissions and ensuring this is a practical piece of legislation for our country moving forward. I commend this bill to the House.
David McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pleased to stand on this bill here. And it's hard to disagree with some of the comments made around the House. And it's great to see that there is full support to move this through to the important stage, which is the Select Committee stage. I do just want to talk briefly about the importance of the energy trilemma. And that's the fact that we want secure energy, we want affordable energy, and we also want sustainable energy. We are blessed as a country with regards to the types of methods that we can use to be able to generate sustainable energy with the solar, the hydro, the geothermal, and of course this one here with wind, not just onshore, but now we're talking about offshore. And the size of these units, as was mentioned by the member from New Zealand First, they are immense. If you think about the blade, one blade of one of these units is over 100 metres long. It wouldn't fit in this room. They are huge. They're higher than the Sky Tower. And if we're talking about 1 gigawatt, which is what's potentially proposed off the South Taranaki Bight, that's 70 of these units spaced about 2 kilometres apart. Immense amount of area consumed by the units, but generating a good amount of electricity and valuable electricity for New Zealand. I'm happy to commend this bill to the House. Thank you.
Very cool, Sam.
Yeah, I thought that would be a different way of doing it.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Kiwi Scout, that was put into the clip, but the clip is meant to sit there and say in it, it's the Seat Warmers compilation. I'm sorry you didn't like it.
I thought it was great.
Oh, so did I. I think it's like it's you know. Oh yeah, no, there are definitely things there.
It sums up how I feel about the whole thing.
Oh yeah, it's just like, you know. So yeah, we're having some fun, energetic way to deal with politicians who have very, very short speeches. And hey, we get to see names we don't usually get to see because they seem to be at the end of speeches.
Kiwi, she gets it now.
Okay, she now gets it.
She's got it. Yep.
Yeah, it's yes. As anyone knows me, a person who does a speech for approximately a minute or less, which actually I've got to admit, David McLeod's was 1:10.
Ooh, just better.
Yeah, it is definitely something to go on there, and I do like it. I actually learned something from David McLeod's speech. Wind turbine blades could be over 100 meters long.
That big, yeah.
Yeah, it's so that is actually useful to sit there and know. Now let's see what Glenn Bennett, the former MP for Newport, before he lost his seat to David McLeod, got to say, because his speech goes for 5 minutes.
It's good to be here this afternoon or this evening and contributing to this piece of legislation, which is well overdue. And I want to reflect in terms of the process in recent years, and being the MP for New Plymouth at the time, I really want to honour and thank the Honourable Dr Megan Woods for her hard work in this space, and the Minister, Minister Brown, in his initial statement, did comment in terms of the engagement of communities and the engagement of iwi. And I believe that in terms of that process was done pre-last election and the work that we did. And I really want to note that there was one particular day, I want to thank the Honourable Dr Megan Woods, who committed to a day sitting down with Ngā Iwi o Taranaki, the 8 iwi representatives of our region, to sit and listen and engage around the energy space in Taranaki. And what's really telling from that hui was the fact that I heard loud and clear that for 150 years Māori had never been included or consulted on when it came to the resources that were being extracted from the whenua of Taranaki. And it wasn't a gracious thank you so much, Minister, for listening to us, but it was an acknowledgement of we need to learn and we need to listen. And I'm glad but also cautious that this piece of legislation is looking in terms of ways that it actually does listen, it does engage with iwi, with hapu, but also with communities. And so as we take this into select committee, I hope and ask of the members of the committee that they'll really prosecute and dig deep into the community engagement, dig deep into what it means to actually truly engage and consult with local iwi, whether it's in Taranaki or wherever it may be. But we look at this legislation and it's around offshore renewable energy. It's not the offshore wind energy bill, it's the offshore renewable energy, because we know there's more than just wind blowing out there and what is possible when it comes to wave technology, even solar panels and other forms. But I think it is a good day for us to be moving, but I hoped and wished that we could have been here a little bit earlier. Now, the regulatory framework for offshore renewable energy has been in the pipeline, and it has been meandering and moving its way. And it felt like it sort of stalled a little bit about a year ago. But I'm looking through the legislation that dropped this week and seeing that work has been done and work needs to continue. And the select committee process is the appropriate place. It's the workhorse of Parliament, where it actually engages with experts, engages with community, engages with iwi, engages in all those spaces. So it's I look forward to hopefully participating, but also seeing the progress that the select committee has on this. Mr Speaker, I do find it interesting that on the same day we passed the fast track approvals bill, which allows the option and the potential beginning of excavating and seabed mining off the South Taranaki coast. On the very same day it passes, we have this piece of legislation around the regulations for offshore renewable energy. And I find it so fascinating because, as has been said by previous speakers, the fact that Blue Float has up and left the country because of the uncertainty, not only of the regulatory regime, but also the fact that the space, the sweet spot for offshore wind in particular is in the same spot. And we have heard time and time again in this House that they are not compatible together. And the fact that we're allowing, on the one hand, a private business and a public piece of legislation to have the option of seabed mining, and then on the other hand we're saying, hey look, let's bring in this wonderful offshore energy regime that's going to change the world, but they can't coexist together. So the challenge for us is how do we get this right? To make sure that we can actually have options. And as Scott Willis said earlier, you know, that this is about creating options for the future, that we have lots of consented onshore renewable energy projects. This is giving options with the potential of offshore. And Mr Speaker, this needs a robust and a very thorough select committee process to go.
So, that sounds less seat warmer speech.
Yeah, so Glenn does bring up a good point. It's the minister at the end of the day that's kind of like doing all the approvals, and if they're deciding to approve, like, oh, we want to do gas and we want to do minerals, and sorry, offshore wind park, you're screwed. Yeah, that's a bit of a problem. It's like actually, winners and losers.
I can actually picture Simeon Brown greenlighting sea mining and offshore wind farms in the same area.
Oh yeah. And
yeah.
The other common thread I'm getting to is that the need for iwi participation, which is like, cool, give them stocks in the companies. That's a good start.
Yeah, that's controversial, but that's a good starting point.
I mean, it's their land.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Was it Arena Williams on her seat speak?
It's a pleasure to take a short call on this bill. And I want to first acknowledge the government's work on bringing this offshore renewable energy bill to the House. It's something to celebrate, to be introducing a piece of legislation in which the intent is to establish a regulatory framework for offshore wind energy in New Zealand. That's a great thing, because by 2030, this country has signed up to commitments which require us to have 100% renewables in our energy grid. That's achievable for New Zealand. That is possible. We are a country rich in natural resources, especially our water. Our dams were built so many decades ago that now the cost of running them is negligible. And that energy should be cheap. It is the greenest in the world, and it's something New Zealanders should be proud of. Our offshore wind energy also provides us with so many significant opportunities for not only economic growth, but for cheap cheaper energy prices for consumers. So that's something we can all agree on in this House, and that this piece of legislation is a step towards that. It's something that we should be able to get around the select committee room table and really get into the detail about how to make this work for New Zealanders. Because the government says that it's still committed to increasing the supply of affordable clean energy and facilitating New Zealand's transition to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. But what we need to make sure is that pieces of legislation like this don't gloss over the fact that the government is cutting many of the things which will help it to achieve those commitments. We need to hold them to these commitments in this piece of legislation. But things like lifting the oil and gas exploration ban, Mr. Speaker, fly in the face of that. Delaying agricultural emissions pricing for 5 years flies in the face of that. Promoting mining projects that have already been considered and rejected flies in the face of that. Missing its own EV targets which it promised voters at the election flies in the face of that. We need offshore wind to step into the gap that this government has created with its policy choices. And New Zealand, as we know, is a signatory to the Paris Agreement. We have signed up to not only our domestic obligations in the Climate Change Response Act, but also to our global obligations that our partners rely on us for and that our trade relationships rely on us for. Our EU FTA is a world-leading trade response. It's great for our agricultural sector. We need our trade partners in the EU to believe that New Zealand is still committed to our clean green reputation. And here on this side of the House, we are. Mr. Speaker, I want to encourage government members to find a way to expedite the process for this. This should be something that we can all agree needs to happen quickly and needs to happen well. Those two things can be done at once. This legislation is expected to be passed mid-25 with the first permits being considered at the end of next year. We need to make sure that there's no impediment to getting these projects built. A project that would get in the way of an offshore wind energy project, as Glenn Bennett has mentioned, is deep-sea mining projects, which are directly in competition with the kind of space that these projects will need. So it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that these projects, these wind projects that we all agree are needed, are given priority within the regulatory framework. I'll tell you how that's done overseas. In Ireland, they are very committed to the offshore wind energy projects. In fact, they have legislation like this alongside ambitious capacity targets, Mr. Speaker, for how much wind should be generating in the energy grid. I think it's 5 gigawatts, Mr. Speaker, that was set for the 2030 goal. That would mean a huge investment not only in government but also through private development. If the government truly believes in getting these projects off the ground, it needs to set targets in an energy plan. But where's the energy plan, Mr. Speaker? It is not here. We do not have it because the government has not owned up to the fact that they need a plan to transition to net zero. We need that plan and to be able to integrate offshore wind into it. Ireland also has a comprehensive policy framework and a national strategy for offshore wind. That needs to sit alongside this legislation so it's not merely window dressing. And I hear members on the other side saying, weren't we working together? I'm doing their homework for them, Mr. Speaker. I can give them the national energy plan in Ireland to study up and do their homework so that they know how legislation like this can actually make a difference to not only New Zealand's commitments on the world stage to climate change, but also domestically, so that New Zealanders now have cheaper energy, so that our children in the future have an environment that they can enjoy, have air that they can breathe. Mr. Speaker, this is incredibly important to everyone in this House, but we need to hold the government to the commitments that they say outside one side of their mouth, but cut things that will really make a difference to it out the other. This must make a difference. This is all they've got, so we're relying on it.
She can do my homework for me any day of the week. I love a copy of her homework. Yeah, so the Electrify New Zealand plan, yeah, that's a problem. I looked all over the internet for it. I can't find it.
Yep.
So that'd be nice. I'd like to get a copy of the plan. And yeah, she basically said the same thing as what Glenn said. You know, you can't have mining and wind in the same area. And this is why the Greens are really big into onshore wind as well, because it is cheaper. It is quicker to establish. I know people don't like the windmills because it's woke wind turbine, the spitty things in the countryside. But
even though they were around long before the word woke translated to, I don't like it.
Hey, I love woke windmills.
Yes, how many do you get to see from your backyard?
Quite a few. I don't mind. Some people get really aggro about it. But,
yeah. Now let's see how the vote goes.
Happy to commend this bill to the House. Thank you.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Offshore Renewable Energy Bill, first reading.
The question is the Offshore Renewable Energy Bill be considered by the Transport and Infrastructure Committee. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Call on Government Order of the Day number 6.
Broadcasting, repeal of advertising.
Okay, so...
No, we're not going to do that bill today.
No. It's definitely... So, yes. Okay, that was quite an interesting, quick bill. Yeah, so it's...
Quick? It was almost 50 minutes.
Oh, yes, but you know how... yes, but we managed to get through every person's speech.
True.
Whoa. Sorry, we're not ready for that one.
Wow. Okay. The computer's ready, though.
Yes, the gene technology bill first reading.
All right.
I'll be honest, I think if we put this out to a poll, no one would have chosen it.
Oh, I have a feeling that this is the one that's going to make people split in the comments because, hang on, let me just open up my notes before my computer crashes and dies and burns and whatever. Come on, computer.
Hold on. This might help.
Sorry, Honourable Judith Collins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that the Gene Technology Bill be now read a first time. I nominate the Health Committee to consider the bill. Madam Speaker, what a great day for science. As part of the agreements with our coalition partners, New Zealand First and the ACT Party, this government has committed to introducing a dedicated legislation for gene technology. This bill is a result of that commitment and the commitment we made to the New Zealand public to bring our regulations for gene technology into the 21st century. Our current regulations for genetically modified organisms are some of the most backward-looking in the world. New Zealand has lagged behind other countries such as Australia, Canada, England, which have safely embraced these technologies for the benefit of their people and their economies. Despite gene technologies having been in use in New Zealand since the 1970s, the restrictive rules and time-consuming processes we have imposed on researchers have made testing and embracing innovation outside the lab all but impossible, but no more. This government has listened to our research, primary industry and medical communities and the frustrations that they have felt over many years. Today, New Zealand moves into the present with a safe, enabling regulatory regime. The legislation will enable the sorts of innovation that will benefit New Zealand while effectively managing risks to the health and safety of people and the environment. Instead of continuing to frustrate, we want to enable New Zealand's biotech ecosystem to attract and retain the brightest minds so that we can deliver solutions to the challenges New Zealand faces, such as climate change, such as increasing the productivity of our primary sector, such as conservation, such as human health, potential cancer cures. From advances in health treatments in our hospitals to supporting our farmers to produce the best food in the world, the transformative power of innovation is key to our country's future and key to making New Zealanders' lives better. A key objective of this legislation is to proportionately regulate gene technologies. A one-size-fits-all approach is neither efficient nor appropriate to managing risks to the health and safety of people and the environment, and we have decades of experience both here and abroad to proportionately regulate gene technology. With the new regime, the government is also taking a forward-looking and sensible approach to the regulation of innovative technologies like gene editing. Other countries around the world, from Australia to Japan to England, are safely embracing these very predictable technologies, and this new legislation will ensure we no longer lag behind. Rather than being apprehensive of innovation, we intend to regulate these more predictable technologies based on their most important factor, that's their outcomes. Previous approaches have been akin to regulating electric cars more stringently because they were a new technology, whereas our approach will be logical, science-based, safe and fair. As a small country, we need to be realistic about what we can achieve and where we can best rely on overseas expertise to deliver benefits for New Zealanders. Our gene technology regime will allow the recognition of comparable overseas gene technologies regulators, which will enable us to make better use of considerable expertise overseas and expand the number of medical therapies available to New Zealanders. This will also have the benefit of freeing up the time of our new regulator, enabling them and supporting their staff to concentrate on areas where their limited time is best spent. It will enhance the efficiency of the regime for researchers and developers of new beneficial applications. This government is committed to creating a new regime that provides both transparent and understandable decisions from the new gene technology regulator and enables participation under a number of application types so that the public can provide input. We believe an effective forum in which the public and users of the regime can express their views on these applications will be essential for public trust in building a more effective system over time. This will be enabled in a range of ways, from specific licence applications right through to the risk tiering framework which will underpin this new regime. I want to take a moment to address some of the rhetoric I've heard this year, so as to assure New Zealanders of what this change means and what it doesn't. This change does not mean a free-for-all on genetic technologies in New Zealand. This change simply means that gene technologies have a pathway for regulatory assessment that is designed to ensure the public and environmental safety of New Zealand. This change does not mean that people have to use gene technologies. This change gives those who want to benefit from these technologies a regulatory approval method so that they can opt in. They do not have to opt out. They'd have to opt in order to use them. This change does not mean we can no longer have organics or be GE-free. GE products have been in New Zealand for years, and things such as soy milk. Other countries with a gene technology regime still have organic sectors. Think of the United States and Australia. The US is the largest organics producer in the world, while also being the largest producer of GM food. This change does not mean that we are opening up the floodgates to genetic engineering of all kinds. Just to be very clear on that point, I can assure you the genetic engineering of human embryos will remain banned. What this does mean for New Zealanders and their families is this. New Zealanders will have better access to more effective cancer treatments such as CAR T-cell therapy, if they want to. Our farmers will have access to productivity tools and emissions reduction technologies, helping them meet their climate goals and get high yields, but only if they want to. Our scientists will no longer be confined to petri dishes, instead having the chance to get their amazing technology approved for use outside the lab, and the New Zealand economy reaping the benefits of that. Think genetically edited apples that take 1 year to grow, fruit and produce, rather than the 5 to 7 years of other apples. Think how useful that would have been after Cyclone Gabrielle decimated so much of the Hawke's Bay horticulture. And I've seen this in one of our labs, in CRI, already being done here, but they can't take it out the lab. We already have the science to do all of this, and these are the productivity tools. If we use them, they will save family businesses, and they will save livelihoods. This is a wonderful day for science, and I encourage all New Zealanders to engage in what gene technology can do for them. I would like to thank all the members and staff from around the House who have engaged with myself and my office on these changes. As this bill progresses through the parliamentary process, I encourage all parties not to lose sight of the real aims of this new legislation. Increased productivity isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It means more income for our hard-working farmers, horticulturalists, and support for our rural and provincial communities. Greater innovation isn't just another publication in a science journal. It means more tools to address the big challenges of our age and provides greater opportunities to incentivise our researchers to stay. A defining moment was the invention of the ability to precisely edit individual genes. The CRISPR process was announced in 2012 and it won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 2020. That changed everything because it means that we're not splicing together genes from different species, but we're editing existing genes. And more medical therapies aren't just a nice to have. It means more effective and safe cancer treatments, and it means greater hope and quality of life for patients and their families. I would also like to thank the staff at MB for all the hard work they've been doing, and also my own staff who have worked so hard to bring this to the House. Madam Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Guys, you're going to hate me for this, but that was actually a pretty good speech. I did a lot of fact checking on that. She's actually right on a lot of points. It is true that biotech will increase productivity in the primary sector and improve conservation outcomes and health outcomes. Some of the projects that are currently being done now is sterile Douglas fir. That's a type of fancy pine tree. To prevent wildling pines in the forestry sector. Someone who has been in the forestry sector, it's a real fucking pain in the ass to deal with wildling pines, and it's a fire risk. So that's pretty cool. The other one that's currently being done is clover. That's like a type of yummy thing that cows like to eat in the field, with boosted condensed tannin content to reduce methane emissions and bloat. I think that's pretty cool. And another one that's being developed is engineering a patient's own cells to fight cancer. That's pretty dope as well. So, I mean, I literally have pages of research that I did on this. She also stated that, Judith Collins also stated that the key objective of this legislation is to proportionally regulate gene technologies, and that a one-size-fits-all approach is neither efficient nor appropriate for managing risks. I agree with this. So, according to MB, HSNO has had a chilling effect on research, development, and application of gene tech because it is not risk proportionate in its outcomes or its requirements of applicants, and it is out of date and its settings do not reflect current GM techniques. So that's what she was saying before with CRISPR back in 2012. HSNO hasn't really accounted for CRISPR in the way how we can just edit already existing genes within a plant or within an organism. That is really cool. And what I really appreciate about this bill is that she's proposing a new risk management approach and a risk tiering framework, which is going to be crucial for improving the economic output and improve the safety and risk assessment of GMO tech. I don't know what apples she's talking about, though. I wish I knew. That sounds cool, an apple variety that can produce fruit in a year. Would love to know.
Yeah. That would actually, considering, like, I know when Chris and Jury planted his macadamias, it was about 15 years before they started fruiting.
Yep.
You know, it was a very long-term investment. And I mean, the good thing is he is still on the family farm that he grew up on. And yeah, it's but you know, these are interesting things. I doubt that Chris would actually touch much of the stuff because he's like organic and all that.
Yeah.
But
And
yeah,
I will,
that's beside the point.
um,
It's, you know, it's looking at that sort of stuff. That's the thing in there. And yes, I would also agree. It was a very good speech. It was knowledgeable. You learned something from it.
Yeah, no, it was. She did hit the points. Now, there are issues with the bill, but the issues is not with the technology itself. It's more to do with the business framework side of things, right? It's the technology itself is you're already working with existing genes. You're not grabbing a weird gene from a fish and then inserting it into an apple. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about CRISPR. Where we're talking about.
And I will say with that, it goes to the fact to show that Judith is a very experienced politician, a very experienced minister.
Yeah, she's done her homework.
Yeah, you know, which is you know, so people could actually learn a lot from her. Let's get to Dr. Deborah Russell for Labor's first reply.
The first gap is the gap between what the Minister says is happening and what is actually happening. The Minister says that we're bringing our rules into alignment with other countries, and in particular Australia. But there's a critical difference. It lies in the space of non-regulated technologies and organisms. It's a tricky technical area where I've taken advice from experts. And those experts have told me that we would allow non-regulation of SDN2 processes where other countries, such as Australia, allow non-regulation of only SDN1 processes. That's site-directed nucleases. And although it sounds like precision engineering, that's only in comparison with the old mash-it-together techniques. The key point is that our rules would be much more permissive than Australia's, and indeed most countries' rules. Australia is in the process of changing its rules, but it is consulting with the public on them. In the meantime, our proposed rules are not aligned with Australia or with other countries. We are way out ahead. The second gap in this proposed legislation, unlike Australia, is that there has been no public consultation. There has been targeted consultation, but has been conducted primarily with those who stand to benefit from the legislation. To their credit, officials have turned to researchers to fill the gap. But it is clear from the published research that most New Zealanders feel the need for much more information about genetic technologies, and many have strongly nuanced views. One study showed that when it comes to gene editing and genetic modification, 11% of Māori and 12% of non-Māori were strongly supportive, and 33% of Māori and 23% of non-Māori leaned supportive. It might be easy to interpret that as showing a fair degree of support for the use of GMOs and gene editing. But when I contacted the authors of that study, they clarified that, quote, although the leaning supportive clusters, both Māori and non-Māori, had a quantitative score that leaned closer towards support for these new technologies, the open-ended responses found strong ambivalence, and that's their original emphasis there, especially among Māori, due to the uncertainty respondents felt about benefits and risks. For example, the qualitative responses of those in the Māori-leaning supportive cluster listed significantly more concerns than opportunities, with several apprehensions about unintended consequences, ethical breaches, and lack of adequate information to make considered opinions. I am not convinced that New Zealanders support the widespread use of GMOs and gene technologies. Of course, they support medical applications, but as for wider uses, it's an open question, and one that the Minister has not grappled with. The third gap is the lack of any economic analysis beyond some hand-waving about possible benefits. There are no numbers in the regulatory impact statement as published. Any numbers that might have been there have been redacted. Worryingly, in the regulatory impact statement, officials say that there are, quote, unquantified costs to organic non-GMO primary producers. NZIER has quantified the possible costs. They estimate that the effect on our exports might be in the order of $10 billion to $20 billion a year. It's not just the organic producers who will be affected. All New Zealand producers benefit from our clean green image, an image that will be irreparably damaged if we do not get this legislation right. The fourth gap is the exclusion of expertise. The regulator is required to set up a technical advisory committee, but that committee has no space for an ethicist. And while the regulator is also required to set up a Māori advisory committee, they are not required to consult that committee. Madam Speaker, I think that most of us in this House, like most New Zealanders, would support the use of GMO and gene editing techniques for medical applications. Indeed, Labour as a government was working towards updating our rules for exactly that purpose. But this bill goes far further. It doesn't just liberalise our rules around genetic engineering, it takes us out in advance of other countries. And it does so with no public consultation, no analysis of the impact on trade, no certain role for tangata whenua, no ethics input. There simply are too many gaps in this bill, Madam Speaker.
Steve Abel.
Well, it's an interesting aspect from Deb, who covers a lot of flaws in the bill.
Yeah, she brings up a lot of complex issues, and it requires a little bit of understanding about how CRISPR works. So she's, by the way, again, like I said, this bill is not concerned about grabbing genes from one organism and then shoving them into another organism. She's talking about, Deborah's talking about SDN1 and 2 processes. So in Australia, they currently have non-regulation of SDN1 processes, which is let's see. Biologists, please cringe in the chat. Basically, it involves breaking a bit of the gene and then allowing it to heal back over, and then grabbing kind of like the traits and the mutations that you want from that. And I know there's some biologists watching this probably going to go, wrong. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm not a biologist.
No, I'm not sure if Susie Wiles watches our show. Maybe someone needs to send this to her.
Probably my older sister is going to be like, Laura, that was cringe and wrong. And it's like, oh, well, shit, I'm sorry.
But does your sister watch?
Sometimes.
Good.
But yeah, so okay, here's my notes. Right. Let's get this right for the biologists. Okay. SDN1 produces a double-stranded break in the genome of an organism without the addition of foreign DNA. So that's SDN1. So Australia doesn't have, allows for non-regulation of that. Whereas this bill is going to also allow for the non-regulation of SDN2, which produces a double-stranded break. And while the break is prepared by the cell, a small nucleotide template that complementary to the target region is supplied, which is used by the cell to repair the break. So yeah, it's basically just a fancier version of version number 1. So, yes, carrying on with the points, Deborah is right. Unlike in Australia, there has been no public consultation on this issue. Farmers that were surveyed by Farmers Weekly, the majority of them thought that, yeah, we'd like to be consulted on this, please. MB's like, nah, we're just going to go to select committee. The study that Dr. Deborah is referring to appears to be titled Identifying Māori Perspectives on Gene Editing in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I shoved a link for that in the chat if people want to read that. She also states that there is a lack of economic analysis, and this is true. There are no numbers in the regulatory impact statement as published, and I'll shove that in the chat now so people can have a read through it for themselves.
Yep.
I'm sorry, guys. There's a lot of points to go over because she made a lot of points. So she also said, Dr. Deborah also said that in the regulatory impact statement, officials say that there are unqualified costs to organic and non-GMO primary producers. This is also true. This can be found on page 6 of the impact statement.
Yeah.
Whew, okay, that was a lot of stuff, guys.
Okay, let's get to Steve Abel.
Yep.
Genetic level is a powerful ability. That is why it must be done with precaution, with ethics, with broader societal values and costs and benefits of the technology, including the economy, taken into consideration, and in recognition of the fact that proprietary interests are the main player in the genetically engineered field. Here in New Zealand, we have a founding agreement that also affirms Māori have sovereignty over taonga and thereby protects Indigenous species from proprietary ownership and modification without consent, and the important considerations of Waitangi 262 claims and finding. Genetic medicine, Madam Speaker, is not contentious and has always been supported by the Greens from insulin through to vaccines, and so too is contained precision fermentation. The release of live self-replicating organisms into the environment and agricultural systems is a different story. This particular legislation is a reckless rush job of potentially monumental proportions because it has failed to take into account those who are most impacted by this liberalisation of the current regime. It is extraordinary, Madam Speaker, that this government has not done a full economic analysis of the impact of this legislation, and the only one done by New Zealand Institute of Economic Research finds a potential $10 to $20 billion cost of our existing value-added component to our primary production sector. That is an extraordinary cost to risk, Madam Speaker. And what is more, when it is assessed as to the marginal costs and benefits of the package and the regulatory impact statement, when GMOs are eventually released according to that statement into the environment under the proposed regime, there will be additional costs to certify products as GMO-free. In the Australian canola example, the additional certification costs are estimated to be $14 per tonne, which is to say the burden of remaining GMO-free, as every current producer in this country is, whether you're an animal producer or a fruit or a vegetable producer or a crop producer, that burden will now fall onto those producers to prove their non-GMO status. It is expected that additional costs to obtain is the word that is used. This premium should be borne by those seeking to obtain value from it, which is to say, and farmers of New Zealand, you should hear this out, you no longer are maintaining your current GE-free status, you in fact are having to pay the cost of obtaining it. This legislation effectively forfeits New Zealand's current non-GMO producer status at a cost of potentially tens of billions of dollars to the economy. What an extraordinarily reckless piece of legislation this is, Madam Chair. One would hope that this was actually treated with true scientific rigour and assessment of the evidence. The evidence of genetic engineering is that the hyperbolic claims made by the Luxon government for what it can do are not borne out by what we've seen in 30 years of commercial production of GE crops. New Zealand is not an outlier in having a rigorous regulatory regime. There are only actually 27 countries in the world that have commercial production of GE crops out of 195 countries. Most of those countries are in the Americas, and of the 4 main commodity crops produced, 99% of the global acreage is those 4 crops: soy, maize, cotton, canola. They mostly end up as animal feed or as biofuels. There is no single product that has high commercial value that is sold as direct human food in the global market. After 40 years of billions of dollars of investment in the United States and thousands of field trials. So when the government suggests that somehow us forfeiting our GMO-free status is going to get us some sort of high-value product, it just doesn't bear out with the evidence of what GE does. And the Minister talks about genetically engineering apples. Well, we currently have a potential 95% premium on New Zealand apples because they are GMO-free. And there is no genetically engineered apple sold anywhere in the world that has extra commercial value. In fact, I don't know of any. So let's be clear that when we evaluate how best to use GE, such as its amazing opportunities in medicine, which is not contentious, the cost to New Zealand farmers of that forfeiture, whereby they will wear the burden, is a big cost, and they should be screaming blue murder, frankly, for this government being willing to sacrifice and risk the value of their primary production industry. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, that is actually quite interesting what he has said there, that the burden to prove yourself to be GMO-free will be assumed that you are unless you sit there and say that, say and pay that you're not.
Yeah, so it's one of those weird days where I agree with everyone. So it's a bit interesting the way how countries determine the difference between GE and GMO. Some countries like Brazil and Argentina, they look at GMO and they say, okay, GMO is when you grab something else from a different species and you insert it into the species that you're editing for. So there's a lot of differences in language around that. GE is, and again, biologists, please feel free to freak out. GE, I'm pretty sure, is referring to just taking genes from the same species and then taking what you want from that. So yeah, there's a little bit of difference there between GE and GMO from what I've read about. Yeah, he's right about the organic stuff. I think there is a way to resolve that problem, though, if the government's willing to give support to organic farmers. I don't know if they will. This is national we're talking about.
Yeah.
They haven't even provided in their impact statement the amount of growth that this is going to potentially result in and whether it's actually worth it or not.
Yeah, that's a good point about that. Yeah, will it actually deliver the results that's intended?
Like comparing the organic sector to the biotech sector. But I think there is a way to have these two side by side and not have them directly competing against each other. But yeah, that is definitely a select committee issue. I don't have the answers to that one, unfortunately.
Oh, let's see what Panjit Palmer's got to say. Another doctor.
I'm so pleased to take this call. Madam Speaker, I know that a lot of hard work has gone into this issue to bring it to the stage, and I can attest to that. It was in 2019 when I stood up as an opposition member of parliament and announced a policy which is basically reflected in this legislation. And then in 2023, when the Honourable David Seymour announced me as a candidate for the ACT Party, at the ACT Party rally, I had the opportunity to deliver a speech. And in that speech, I talked about this issue of profound significance of approaching genetic modification differently in New Zealand. And I said that the Hazardous Substances and New Organisms Act, which regulates genetic modification in New Zealand, is no longer fit for purpose. And it was really pleasing to see that a week after that, National re-announced the policy, that is to change the approach towards genetic modification, and then it became part of our coalition agreement. And here we have this bill going through the first reading. Madam Speaker, the examples that I used in my 2019 announcement are still valid. The examples I used were of HME ryegrass. This is high metabolizable energy ryegrass developed by Ag Research. It was looking really promising when they did all the tests at lab level for reducing greenhouse gases emissions, but then they couldn't do field trials here in New Zealand. They could have, but Madam Speaker, they didn't want to go through all the hoops dealing with the HESNO Act. So they decided to go overseas to do those field trials. And then the other example is of another Crown Research Institute plant and food. They developed a red flesh apple. This is apple, not just the skin that has red skin, but the flesh is also red. And this apple, because for any fruit, as we know that nutrition is important, but then the taste is important as well. So the scientists couldn't taste that fruit here in New Zealand. They had to take that red flesh apple overseas to taste that apple. So with these two examples, what we can see is, we can see that the timeline for bringing these products to commercial level was pushed out by, not just by months, but by years and years. So that is the kind of delay that is happening in the work that is happening in our labs at the moment. And this work is of really high value. It's expensive as well. And we know that it's highly skilled people, those who do this kind of work. When this kind of work goes overseas, we also, Madam Speaker, knowingly and unknowingly are losing a lot of skilled workers going to other countries where they can take that work to the next level. So it's really important that we change this legislation and that the legislation is fit for purpose. We want to see that the legislation is not only working for the next 20 years, as we have seen the past legislation. The HESNO Act has worked for around 20 years, and already from last 5 to 6 years, I have been advocating for change of this legislation. So we want to see that this legislation actually works for longer, because this is a technology that is advancing really, really fast. And that's why it's important that the legislation is not based on technique, but it's based on risk. So regulation should be proportional to risk. The other thing that is really important here is that we want to see that it's a consistent legislation all through the country, because scientists need consistency. They need certainty. If different local bodies start making regulations at their level, approaching genetic modification differently, then it will cause confusion, which is happening at the moment. So we want to stop that confusion happening as well. Madam Speaker, it's really important to note that scientists out there are quite frustrated. They really want us to act on this, and they want us to act on this really soon. I did a survey earlier this year. I surveyed scientists, those who are doing work in this field, and the responses that I received were quite amazing. Hearing the kind of work that they are doing. This work is of really, really high value. And Madam Speaker, I have said this before, and I will say this again, that we cannot continue to feel proud standing up and saying that we are GE-free, because that means we are still stuck in the trial and error method of selective breeding. And just to finish, really great to see that so many colleagues on this side will be supporting this bill, are in support of this change, this approach that we're changing towards genetic modification, because in the start, when I started talking about this, I was advised not to use these two words, genetic modification. I was asked to use a different term, and really good to see that now these two words, genetic modification, can be used the way they should be used. So I commend this bill to the House. Thank you.
I just caught something there. She said, we can't call ourselves GE free. Now, New Zealand is not strictly GE free, right? We've got genetic engineering occurring in laboratories around New Zealand. What we are is GMO free. right? There is like I said before, there is a bit of a difference between the two, so the language does matter. I know what apple variety she's referring to. This is the one that I'm familiar with. So this is basically when the geneticist, they got some wild apples from Kazakhstan, and then they crossed the genetics with a commercial white-fleshed variety. And so apple varieties in New Zealand are generally developed through selective breeding. That's true. It's a technique that's been used by humans for thousands of years. With genetic engineering technology, geneticists can isolate which genetic information they want, and this makes the breeding process faster and more efficient. So with red flesh apples, this is really cool because the gene was MYB10, which is found in apples, strawberries, and raspberries. And what this gene does is that it regulates the production of, and again, forgive my Latin Greek, I can't pronounce shit for shit, anthocyanin, which is a red pigment that contains antioxidants. So yeah, that is a cool piece of tech. And I, as far as I'm aware, I think that apple is being grown in America right now. But yeah, it'd be cool to see some of those apples around New Zealand.
Let's see what New Zealand First has got to say.
This first reading of the Gene Technology Bill. This is a long overdue update to the Has No Act 1996. Science has moved on a long way, and this has been a third rail, I think, in New Zealand politics, probably since the Corngate saga. So it is high time we had a look at this legislation. Essentially, we are looking at liberalising the laws around gene technology, establishing a regulator. It is a three-tier system, a non-notifiable pathway, which is for the lower risk technologies, a fast track, if you like, a notifiable pathway and a licensed pathway. There is no doubt that there are more tools available for our scientists and the potential for significant and speedier advancements in technology. And we've heard quite a bit of support, particularly in the medical space already here this evening. Of course, this is a wide-ranging technology. It is a very broad category. It is a continuum from gene editing, the CRISPR stuff, where you're essentially speeding up natural processes right through to genetic modification and splicing different genes together. And I note that it is a coalition agreement to liberalise the genetic engineering laws. It does go on to say, while ensuring strong protection for human health and the environment. I think this is going to be, I know this is going to be a very consequential select committee. This is a very complex area for which there is a wide variety of views. New Zealand First will be led by that select committee report. We must not trade away our gene-free competitive advantage lightly. We essentially have last mover advantage to think very, very carefully about how we position ourselves in the space, particularly in food. We are a major food exporter. We must take the feedback of that sector, particularly our major exporters, extremely seriously. Fonterra has historically been very cautious on this technology. I understand their attitude has softened a bit of late, but it is those major exporters particularly that we must look to give some guidance. We must understand the trade-offs we are making. This is very much a risk-reward. The organic sector also, we do have some concerns around them. We must understand what the impacts are on them and what mechanisms are going to be available for them to continue on growing their sector. Consumer sentiment is also a factor. We've seen recently a methane inhibitor in the UK, released in the UK, the Biovar product that has received major consumer pushback. And so there is often a difference between the enthusiasm of scientists for this technology and consumers, and we must look to understand that. We have to be alert and humble enough to recognise that truism. We must also be compatible with our trading partners. There is no point getting too far ahead of ourselves in that regard. Madam Speaker, should I say, our GE regime is going to change. The live question is where we draw the line. We look forward to the Select Committee report, and New Zealand First will be closely scrutinising. Thank you.
Agree with the statement from Simon Hughes. New Zealand First is trying to find a middle path. That sounds so right. In Corngate, the interview was John Campbell. The book writer was Nikki Hager.
Ah, okay.
Just since that's Paul Cook has brought that one up about the interview was done by John Campbell, but the book was actually Nikki Hager's book, one of his many infamous books that get usually released at about 5 o'clock at Unity Books in Wellington, so that no one can get to the High Court to put an injunction, so it appears on the 6 o'clock news.
I have not read the Corngate book.
Well, put it this way, both you and I were kids at the time.
Ah, right. Well,
2002.
I think I remember the picture on the cover, but yeah, it's kind of interesting to see how NZ First is just breaking away from ACT on this one. Like, actually, we agree with the other side. But okay.
Yeah. Okay, so should we move on to Hannah Rafferty, Michael Clark?
Sure.
I gotta say, this is one of the most complex, technical and contentious bills, potentially just as contentious as the Treaty Principles Bill. Why? This bill may not be about a treaty between two peoples, but a treaty between humankind and all living things, the environment, animals and foods. This is a kaupapa that I'm very passionate about. Before this political life, I was living the dream. I was a full-time gardener and a project manager where we created the first ever Māori organic community kai garden in partnership with the Ministry of Primary Industries. We turned a once huge corn maze that honestly just gave us hay fever into a Māori supermarket with lush, abundant, good, nutritious food for the local communities in my electorate. This is where I was introduced to the concept of what GE and GMO is and the whakapapa of our kai. So what is gene technology? To break it down for all the rangatahi watching right now. It is the science of changing or controlling the genes inside living things, like plants, animals, or even bacteria, to make them do things we want. Genes are like the instructions that tell living things how to grow, look, and work. With gene technology, scientists can add, remove, or change these instructions to improve health, make better crops, or even create new medicines. It's like editing a recipe to make it better, different, or potentially even worse. I myself have personally been a GE and GMO-free advocate. And before I carry on, I'd like to acknowledge the many different teams, Te Waka Kaiora, Huapara Kore, He Whenua Rongo, Kore Hia Kai, and Te Papa Whakaritorito Trust, for their continuous advocation and knowledge in this kaupapa. So what are the pros and cons? Pros, improved crops. 2, disease treatment, better nutrition, medical advancements. Cons, environmental risks, health concerns, ethical issues, and cost and control. In my eyes, GE in the right hand is great, but GE in the wrong hands is terrible. Aotearoa's New Zealand current status on genetically modified organisms, otherwise known as GMOs, is that no fresh produce or meat is genetically modified and no GMOs are grown commercially. However, some processed foods may contain approved GMO ingredients that have been imported. With the introduction of this bill, that is about to completely change. JR running from the Daily Telegraph New Zealand says, I quote, "The proposed deregulation of GMOs is so extreme that Judith Collins' current proposal would turn New Zealand from the best practice, tight regulated jurisdictions to one of the weakest in the Western world," end quote. This bill is taking the lead from Australia and acknowledges that we need to bring our legislation up to par with the international frameworks. However, proposed European legislation has stalled, and in Europe, deregulation exclusively concerns plants, while in New Zealand, deregulation would encompass plants, animals, and microbiomes. My first policy release was an Aotearoa's Kai sovereignty policy. Some of the main points within this policy was to honour Y262 and reject research and the commercialisation that is done without hapu, iwi, and whānau consent. Two unresolved issues raised in Y262 claims remain outstanding, and it is the duty of this Parliament to honour the claim and bring the claim to conclusion. Decisions about flora, fauna and wider environment that is symbolic to Māori culture, and decisions about how education, culture and heritage agencies support the transmission of Māori culture. We don't oppose the research and rangahau that can create massive benefits for humankind, but as a nation we must assure that these checks and balances in our regulatory system framework is in a place that is robust enough to counter the potential risk factors. We have no idea of the long-term impacts into the future. We are literally going into the unknown, or otherwise opening a can of worms. As Māori gardeners, me, Rawiri, Debbie and Mariamino have various seeds that protect handed down from our ancestors all the way from Hawaii, which we still plant in our backyards today. This speaks volume to the way in which we protect our Māori intangible and tangible resources and taonga. I could have gone longer, but Sam Offendale.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay. Interesting. I'd like to know whether this organic, what's it, planting Māori supermarket of fruits and vegetables placed.
I love a good Māori kai. I love a good Māori supermarket, but yeah, I mean, I like Hannah, but I disagree with you here. Yeah, so we're not talking about taking genes from different species and merging them with other species. We're not talking about creating plants that are going to be crossbreeding with other plants. We're talking about sterile plants. We're talking about, so I think a lot of what she's going on about is a bit, it's a bit overblown.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I'm much more concerned about the business side of things rather than, oh, this potential red-fleshed apple could give you cancer, even though we don't have empirical evidence for that. It's like, yeah, I haven't seen any research that shows that GE food causes cancer. I looked it up. I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
It's pretty inconclusive. I don't know how the GE food would cause you cancer, especially if we're working with already existing genes within, like, say, an apple. I'm not quite sure which gene within the apple causes cancer, or how much. But yeah, I need a bit more than what she gave me.
Yeah. So true. Yeah. Oh well. I think it's time for our seat warmers compilation.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This government is ending the 30-year ban on gene technology outside the lab. And there's a reason we're doing this. It's because we are going to tackle climate change. There is technology out there that we can use to tackle climate change, that we can use to help people get better from cancer, that we can use to boost productivity. And at the current settings, we don't have the ability to do that. That's what we're going to do, Madam Speaker. It's going to be a key source of science that has the potential to deliver enormous benefit to New Zealand, and we intend to utilise it. Now, there are people out there that are worried about the safeguards. Let me say to that, as the Minister has clearly articulated, there will be a regulator set up which will be established to oversee the use of gene technology in New Zealand. You don't have to utilise it as you don't want to, if you don't want to, as Minister Collins said on a number of occasions. And we did hear a member opposite, I think, raise concerns about a lack of public consultation on the matter. There will be. It's called a select committee, and I know the members of the Health Committee will be doing a very good job on that when it comes to us soon. We are moving to deliver on our pre-election commitment to deliver gene technology and delivering on our coalition agreements with our partners. We are going to use technology like gene technology for the benefit of New Zealand. I commend this bill to the House.
Dr. Hamish Campbell. Madam Speaker, it is a great day for science. I have spent my working life dedicated to scientific research, including using these genetic technologies, which ultimately is about improving the health outcomes of all New Zealanders and improving our quality of life. I'm also an organic producer, so I understand people that are producing things organically, and the two aren't mutually exclusive. We can do both. This bill is very important, and to unleash our medical research, our agricultural research, because this is not just about CAR T cells and cancer treatments, it's also about environment and economic outcomes for all New Zealanders. Therefore, I commend this bill to the House.
Dr. Vanessa Wiener. Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honour to be the final speaker in this debate on the first reading of Gene Tech Bill. It's a great day for science, as many have said. This bill puts in place the regulatory enablement to allow the exciting advancements and potential in health research and biotech in our plant and food sector, and especially in our crown research institutes like Scion. This is a great day. I commend the bill to the House.
Oh my God. Take a drink of your... Wow. Take a drink of your favourite alcohol every time they say it's a great day for science.
Oh, I'd just like to sit there and say that those speeches, in order to fit within the time frame of the clip, were at 120% normal of their normal speed. So, not quite 150 that we normally sit there and watch at. They were at 120, and the music for that one was slowed down to 92.5% to just to add some expansion, because Sam actually had a bit of a longer speech than what was initially doing it. But yes, as Simon's got on that, that's the whole point of the Seat Warmers compilation.
Yep.
Is to show, because that was something that's always been going on there. Oh, time to move on. It's like, yep. And these are things that Laura and I and Stacey do talk about behind the scenes. How do we get more information in there? And that was something we talked about last week. And I, was it Sono today, got that Seat Warmers compilation speech song going through there. It ended up giving me 4 copies. That's the one I settled with, which originally it was just meant to be an opener, but to be honest, the music going all the way through is brilliant.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, let's see what Joe Luxon's got to say, because her speech ain't Seat Warmer.
piece of legislation, which unfortunately Labor at this stage cannot support it going any further. And I'd like to cover the reasons of as to why. As my colleague previously mentioned before, we can see the absolute benefits as far as medical research and etc., vaccines and all of those things go. But where we have concern, and that is partly around the consultation process or lack thereof. The previous speaker talked about the fact that there'll be consultation will be able to be happening as part of the select committee process. But I would argue that before something as big and complex as this is developed, there should be far wider consultation before it even gets to this stage, before the bill is even completely developed. And in fact, Madam Speaker, there was some research done recently which showed 93% of the farmers that were surveyed thought it was important that there was widespread consultation with farmers. That has not happened, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we know that there are a wide and diverse range of views as far as this particular subject goes, and I would argue that that is particularly relevant as far as the horticultural sector goes. There is some real concern out there within that sector as to what this could mean for them. And Madam Speaker, if we think about those that are growing organically, what happens if we have some sort of a crop or something that flowers and then contaminates a property nearby that is organic? Who pays for that happening? What will there be insurances taken out for those who are responsible for that in order for them to have to pay compensation? Is there going to be additional costs for those organic growers to have to go through and show that they continue to comply and be organic farmers? Madam Speaker, I also want to touch on some of the information that we have seen in this RIS, the RIS that is put together with advice for the Minister. There is a lot of concerns that were raised, particularly around the lack of being able to consult widely. They were only able to do some specific targeted consultation, and I just think that that's really irresponsible when we're looking at a piece of legislation that means that our farmers and our growers and others are going to have to just put up with whether they choose it or not. It's going to be out there. And Madam Speaker, yes, I can understand and see the benefits as far as research and innovation goes when we think about reducing our methane targets and all those kinds of things. I absolutely understand and get that, but the crux of the matter is that there is lack of consultation, Mr. Patterson, the lack of consultation from all those relevant in the sectors, and it should be done well before the select committee process, Mr. Patterson. The other thing, that's not consultation on this particular piece of legislation. The consultation, they talk about the election and the campaigning, and they campaigned on it, but you didn't campaign on the details, did you, Mr. Uffindale? You didn't campaign on the details. You didn't campaign on the potential risks to our trade, which I know that my colleague, the Honourable Damien O'Connor, is going to speak to, because there are some serious implications. And the one other thing that I would like to highlight, Madam Speaker, was they're going to establish a Māori advisory committee. As far as I can tell, Madam Speaker, this is simply tokenistic, absolutely tokenistic, because reading this RIS, they talk about that the proposals alter the status quo by placing a duty of decision makers to manage adverse effects to Māori kaitiaki relationships with specific species, instead of requiring them to take into account Te Tiriti principles more generally. Given time and scope constraints, officials did not analyse a wide range of options on how to best protect Māori rights and interests. They also gave different options to ministers, which they chose not to give Māori the opportunity to have decision making in this process. We do not support this, Madam Speaker.
Hold on a minute. She was with Labor, wasn't she?
Yes.
Yeah, she's with Labor. Didn't the previous Labor speaker say we're going to be supporting this bill?
No, it didn't say anything along those lines at all.
I'm pretty
like,
sure.
You were supporting the select committee process, but wasn't
right, yeah. I was going to say, it's like, hold on a minute.
yeah, which I mean, yeah, there's quite a few bills where we don't support the bill, but we look forward to dealing with it at the select committee.
Yeah, okay, all right. Yeah, that makes sense. So the overall theme I'm getting here is that people don't have an issue so much with CRISPR technology. People have got an issue with lack of consultation, potential business impacts, economic impacts, but the technology itself is not so much the problem.
Yeah, and if you see a public consultation is called select committee process.
Yeah, I really.
If you weren't focusing on the theme, you can actually focus in on his words.
Yeah, I know. That was really dismissing of him. I really do wish that farmers were consulted about this prior to the bill being announced. And
I've seen in the comments in here, someone wants to make Tauranga to be an ACT seat after the next election.
Okay. Good luck.
Well, it's one they could win.
Yeah.
I mean, Damien O'Connor, the former Minister of Agriculture.
report was put out by Te Puna Whakaranui, which recommended that we have a conversation on GE regulation because we had fallen behind. At the same time, the Labor government was looking at changes to GE regulations for medical purposes. The conversation has not occurred. What we have received in the House is a bill that will have limited scope for change that this government is going to proceed with. The question I have, who paid money to bring this bill into this House? Who paid money to bring this bill into this House, Madam Speaker? Because, and there are officials up there, they've done quite a lot of work. They've been instructed by the government to rush that work. And they've written a report here of 131
Point of order,
pages.
Honourable Scott Simpson.
Madam Speaker, I hesitated to interrupt the member on his feet, but to allege that money had transferred to bring a bill into this House is utterly unparliamentary, and the member should stand, withdraw and apologise.
Well, I think it was on the border, but the thing that was concerning me was bringing officials into the debate, which actually, Minister Honourable O'Connor, I think probably wasn't the wisest thing across that whole sentence.
Can I just acknowledge it wasn't to discredit in any way the officials, but they've done a report here, 131 pages, which is quite comprehensive, and you should read it. It sets up a regulator, a person within the Environmental Protection Agency, a person who is accountable only to the Minister. Only to the Minister. What piece of legislation of such significance would set up such a regime? Madam Speaker, I've gone through this in detail. Madam Speaker, I'll start off here with officials' advice that says, they're very sensitive, aren't they, on this? Very sensitive they are. Quote, we are unable to comprehensively quantify these expected benefits on technology development is uncertainty. As technology development is uncertain, there are few ready-for-market gene technologies in New Zealand currently, and the makeup of New Zealand's food and fibre industry is distinct. Madam Speaker, the reality is that our economy depends on the production and the sale of the finest food and fibre in the world. Our economy depends upon it. And the report quite clearly says that there is general enthusiasm and support for progress in medicine, but not in the food and fibre sectors, which is where a conversation needs to occur. Madam Speaker, I'll go through this again and quote here. Current understanding of the current and potential gene technology sector limited our ability to outline both benefits and potential impacts, and is in part a consequence of the existing regulatory constraints on the activity. Madam Speaker, they go on to say the scope limitation has meant that we have not considered all potential options that may have effectively addressed key issues underlying. This has been rushed. There has been no conversation. In here it once again says that there may not be the public licence to progress the very changes that this government may want to see. And indeed, I want to see as well, but I want to see a cautious progress here. Can I go on to say, Madam Speaker, from this report that everyone should have, the policy development process has been limited by a timeline seeking to cabinet approval of policy decisions to enable the introduction of a bill into the House before the end of 2024. In order to enable the regime to be operational in 2025, this has compressed the analysis able to be undertaken in a highly complex area and may mean options, impacts and consequences were not or fully considered. There has been little or no consideration of what the impacts of this might be on core parts of our economy. Madam Speaker, I'll go on to say that in assessing the so-called risk analysis, the question of whether trade in our markets should be taken into account, it has been rejected. It says here, Madam Speaker, the expected eventual release into the environment of some GMOs will involve potential risk for trade and market access because trading partners may not accept exports that have been contaminated by GMOs, incidentally or otherwise. This puts at risk our markets and the sale of all of our primary produce, and there has not been any proper consultation, proper consideration, and indeed this bill prevents the consideration, on the basis of the recommendations in here, prevents consideration of those market access. This is potentially disastrous for trade, Madam Speaker. Labor will be not supporting this bill.
Interesting point he brought up there.
I'm glad he was the last speech for that debate tonight.
Yeah, the fact that the, what did he say there, the regulatory agent is accountable to the minister. I've always had a problem with the minister having the final say. I've never really been a fan of that. I've always preferred kind of the minister acting as tiebreaker in an expert panel. But yeah, I don't know, there's just too much power concentrated.
It is more of what's the other alternative that can be out there is the other question. But yeah, that does make a point, is it to the minister or should it be to the Environment Court?
I would say the Environment Court.
I mean, I'm not sure about New Zealand, but they do say in the United States the Solicitor General is the invisible 10th Justice on the US Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Could that be the regulator is the invisible person to the Environment Court, which tends to basically deal with these issues when there are disputes?
Yeah, I mean, which of the two has got the least political bias Is
Yeah,
it the court
usually the
or is it the
courts.
minister? I would prefer the regulator to be accountable to the court rather than to a minister. Like I said, I've always found it to be an issue that a minister got to hold that much power and influence over something that could impact our economy like this.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Like, where do you draw the line? Now, I haven't got a seat warmers compilation for this one, but we've got the Resource Management Consenting and Other Systems Changes Amendment Bill.
Oh, that's a big one.
We probably will only get through about 4 speeches, but hey, it's better than nothing. We get to have a bit of a nosy of what's happening. Okay, let's kick off with the Minister, Chris Bishop. Oh, hold on. I have to hit this key here.
Mr Speaker, I present a legislative statement for the Resource Management Consenting and Other System Changes Amendment Bill.
That legislative statement is published under the authority of the House and can be found on the Parliament website.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Resource Management Consenting and Other System Changes Amendment Bill be now read a first time and nominate the Environment Committee to consider the bill. Mr Speaker, this bill continues the Coalition Government's commitment to reform the resource management system to drive economic growth and increase productivity by making it easy to get things done in New Zealand. It follows on from Fast Track and our first Resource Management Amendment Bill, which passed into law in October. This bill, sir, is a precursor to full replacement of the RMA, but it makes important changes in the short term to make it quicker and simpler to consent renewable energy, boost housing supply and reduce red tape for the primary sector. As I said at length in the last debate, sir, current RMA isn't working as a handbrake on growth for the country. So we have taken a phased approach to RMA reform. Phase 1, which was completed almost a year ago, was to repeal the previous government's excessively complicated reforms. Now in the middle of Phase 2, making improvements to existing RMA to cut red tape and green tape, primary industries and development and infrastructure, whilst maintaining environmental protections. And these reforms will lay the groundwork for Phase 3, the long-term replacement for the RMA with legislation based on the enjoyment of property rights. There are 5 major changes in this bill. This is quite a chunky and substantive bill, far more substantive than Bill 1. The infrastructure and energy package in the bill gives effect to the government's Electrify New Zealand reforms, which is all about making it easier to get renewable energy built, as well as improving how ports run. There are key changes delivered through this bill. Councils must decide renewable energy generation consents within 1 year of application. Consents for renewable energy generation will receive 35-year consents by default. The default lapse period for renewable energy consents and for infrastructure project designations will go from 5 years to 10 years. Ports will be given requiring authority status, and port coastal permits will be extended for another 20 years to 2046. Designating authorities will no longer have to complete detailed assessments of alternatives when they are the sole landholder. So the housing package is particularly important. It includes reforms to enable the first pillar of the government's Going for Housing growth policy, will allow councils to opt out of the medium density residential standards, as well as providing councils with ways to make faster plan changes. It also provides for new intervention powers for the Minister for the Environment to ensure councils comply with national direction. So in relation to the MDRS, the bill introduces a ratification vote for councils on the medium density residential standards to decide whether to keep, change or remove them, whilst also ensuring councils are providing for 30 years of housing growth. And it's the quid pro quo of being allowed to opt out of the MDRS, is that councils deliver 30 years of live zoned housing growth. The bill also makes changes to the streamlined planning process and requires all plan changes that use this process, including for the MDRS, to establish an independent hearings panel. The bill empowers the Minister to appoint up to half the members of the IHP. The bill makes councils, rather than the Minister, the final decision maker, but it also provides the Minister for the Environment with new intervention powers to ensure compliance with national direction. All of that is quite complicated, sir. Let me just give you a little bit of colour. Over the last few years, we've been going through this process, or councils have been going through this process to bring their plan changes into line with the MDRS, but also the NPS-UD. I think everyone acknowledges that having the councils appeal to the Minister for either RMA reform or Minister for the Environment is not a particularly great way to go about it. It's producing quite good outcomes in some cases, but it is not really what you'd like. So the bill changes that and means that councils are the final decision makers. However, it is also true to say that the IHP has not, or the independent hearings panel process has also not been that great either, and so the bill provides for the Minister to appoint up to half the members of the IHP. To give effect to the government's Going for Housing growth policies, it is necessary to have greater intervention in the way in which councils complete the housing and business capacity assessments as per the NPS-UD, and there's a range of changes coming there as part of the National Direction Package, which is not included in this bill, but is coming next year. So the changes in the bill will allow councils to delist heritage buildings identified in their district plans in a faster way using the streamlined planning process. At present, if councils wish to remove a building from the heritage list, they have to use a standard plan-making process. It's a very complicated process, very convoluted. It's many steps, takes a long time, has quite broad rights of appeal. So under the changes introduced by this bill, councils will be able to apply to the Minister for the Environment for an SPP that is of appropriate scale to the issue being addressed. And the changes for housing and heritage will work in conjunction with national heritage, with national direction, as I say. Third series of changes is around the farming and primary sector package to unlock primary sector productivity, reduces the regulatory overlap between the RMA and the Fisheries Act. It will provide for flexibility and certainty for marine farm consent processes. It will make farm plan certification more practical and cost effective, as well as making sure resource consent applications for wood processing are decided within 1 year. There's a section in relation to emergency and natural hazards. The bill will make responses to natural hazards and emergencies more efficient and effective, as well as ensure the planning system is not allowing inappropriate development in areas with significant natural hazard risk. The bill introduces a new regulation making power to support emergency responses to assist with recovery and clarifies and strengthens council's ability to decline land use consents or to apply appropriate conditions where there are significant risks of natural hazards. And of course, we are working on a natural hazard national direction package, which I think has been quite widely welcomed by local government land, and that will be part of 2025 as well. Finally, the bill introduces a series of sensible system improvements, which I think most people will welcome. There are higher fines for non-compliance. There are changes to how resource consents applications are dealt with. Fines for non-compliance with the RMA will be increased, and insurance that pays those fines will be banned. Councils will be able to recover more costs from those breaching the RMA, as well as consider compliance history during resource consent applications. And there's a bit of debate around that during the fast-track process. We're also changing the discharge rules under Section 70 to provide certainty and to align with changes to Section 107 that was done through the Resource Management Freshwater and Other Matters Amendment Bill 2024. There are minor changes to dock functions to improve the management of discharges on the dock estate and improve RMA compliance checks on offshore islands. The amount of further information a council can request from a consent applicant will be clarified so it's not overly onerous. Applicants will be able to request to review consent conditions prior to a consent decision being issued, and councils will be able to return abandoned consent applications. These are system improvements, is the easiest way to describe it. I think it's worth noting, sir, that these changes are designed to work in conjunction with a whole series of changes we're making to national direction, national policy statements and national environmental standards next year. And so much of the changes we are making are designed to port over into the new regime. We're acutely conscious, sir, that the government is moving fast. We're making a lot of changes to resource management law, but we eventually want to settle on a system that is enduring. And we eventually want to settle on a system that settles down so that we can actually get on with implementation. And so as much as possible, we are taking a least regrets approach to reform. So as much as we can, the changes through this bill and the changes through national direction next year, we want to port across and transition into the new system to reduce the need for constant chopping and changing and constant council churn and flux. That is a difficult task. I've got to be honest with the House, that is tricky. But if we can get it right, we can create a more enabling framework for everybody, and an enabling framework that also protects and upholds environmental protections and also sets environmental bottom lines. I think it is possible to do that. I actually think there's more consensus across the Parliament when it comes to resource management reform than perhaps you would think from what we've heard during the quite heated debate around fast track. I think most people are in favour of greater standardisation. I think most people are in favour of fewer plans. Most people are in favour of less litigation and more certainty. Most people are in favour of an enabling framework and a spatial planning framework that makes it easier to plan, consent and deliver infrastructure for the future. Most reasonable people are in favour of that, and that is the government's goal as well. And so 2025, a lot of it is going to be about the delivery of national direction and building a framework that can set New Zealand up for growth and development whilst protecting the environment in the 2020s and beyond. Thank you.
The question is...
Holy shit, that is a, he wasn't kidding, that is a chunky bill. I wish I did my homework on this, but I spent too much time looking at windmills. I have the transcript open. I do find this a bit odd, and you know, I'd like to get your thoughts on it, Sam, but he says, and I quote, "The bill makes councils rather than the minister the final decision maker." Okay, I like that. That's cool. Yeah. But he also adds this in, but it also provides the Minister for the Environment with new intervention powers to ensure compliance with national direction. What does that part mean?
It could be to stop, say, a NIMBY, say, put it this way, an area that possibly needs growth could be Wellington City Council. And suddenly you get a whole heap of anti-housing people who want quarter-acre sections onto the council who steer a district plan in the opposite direction to the national policy statement of making it more accessible for houses. So that could be where it will be something to intervene. Now, this was evident with the recent district plan changes in Wellington, where when the basically if the councillors and the commissioners agreed, it was a tick. But if the councillors did not agree with the commissioners, they could go to the minister to override the commissioners' rulings, which the commissioners are an independent body, people who are experts in fields with resource consent stuff. They're like judges. They're not usually politicians. However, there are some, and actually quite a few, councillors out there who do have RMA commissioner certifications. Andy Foster, I believe, was one of them. Iona Pennant was another. This is in Wellington City Council. Greater Wellington Regional Council, Ros Connolly, I know, was looking at doing the STIRT. I did hear through the grapevine, Tamitha Paul was looking at it at one stage during her first term. David Lee is a confirmed RMA commissioner, and he's currently a regional councillor on Greater Wellington Regional Council. You would find that across the board on many different councils. You might find councillors on it because they've been interested in the sector. They see it could bring something to the table on their own council. Okay, they can't act in their own council's basis, but they can go and act in a different jurisdictions area and be independent commissioner from that area as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I remember meeting the commissioner for who did the Johnsonville market. And, it probably was the best person to have on there because he had no clue what the market was about until he had it land on his desk for resource consent.
Right. And is the government going to allocate more funding for councils to have, I don't know, their own internal expert panels?
Well, they kind of already do, actually, under the current RMA. And the other thing is, when you pay resource consent, part of those fee contributions is to paying for those expert panels, or should we say those expert staff members employed by the council. It's a contribution towards their costs. It's not exactly a financial burden that tends to fall on the ratepayer directly. You tend to pay development contributions, and one of the things that contributes to that sort of thing, such as having the council sound technician out there, such as having the council traffic technician out there, that sort of thing. And usually when you have an RMA panel, the council has their experts on one side of the panel, but it's usually an employee from each of the different entities. In big councils, you'll probably have quite a few. If you get small councils like Carlton or Taurua, you might be lucky if you have one, or you might have them contracted them from another council. Well, considering we know the situation with Taurua, how they have no building inspectors.
Right, okay. So, yeah, I do find that language, though, national direction, to be kind of interesting, because that kind of implies, I mean, does that imply something that's independent from the government? So it's like, okay, we've got like courts and whatnot, or does that imply party direction?
Yeah, it'll probably be with national policy statements. I mean, this is the interesting one that came out of Newtown, and the part that really got me was the amount of pro-housing councillors that voted down the proposal, which really just amazes me. Was the national policy statement for 2021, 2021, maybe 2020, for Newtown, it required 700 new dwellings over the next 30 years. So Martin Hanley and Anna Kimber Welsh, who are the people who started Newtown Festival, came up with an alternative plan that delivered 2,000 new dwellings in half the space to what the NPS required. And the pro-housing councillors voted it down because it wasn't available to upscale all areas, but it doesn't mean it necessarily happens. Whereas the Newtown alternative plan had developers that were, had plans that were being stonewalled by councils, sort of thing. And it actually took into account some of the realistic things that went in there, like in a building context. The economies of scale for building heights, 4 stories is where you hit the economic equilibrium. You go to 5, the next point you hit an economic equilibrium is 8. And a lot of the zoning options that were being looked at across Wellington were 6 stories, which just meant if you left it to the market would only be building 4-story houses.
Yep.
Yeah, it was something in there. And I mean, you do get some stupid things out there, like you get people like Rebecca Matthews who wanted to have the government to fund to double track the Johnsonville line so they could have high density housing on it. Even though that was completely ridiculously stupid, considering the Johnsonville line, that wouldn't stack up, considering you're looking at a railway line that sits down there and travels for about 20, it's a 24-minute service off peak and a 26-minute peak. Just because of it, and the thing is with the Johnsonville line is it's only service slots are either 60 minutes, 30 minutes, or 15. You cannot do anything other than that combination because of the way that line is set up. Whereas if you look at, say, the Wairarapa line out to Upper Hutt or the North Island Main Trunk line up to the Kapiti Coast, up to Plympton, you can run up to 10-minute frequencies. on the case of the Wairarapa line, you can run up 10-minute frequencies up to Upper Hutt because it's double tracked. But it stacks up in there because you're also running freight down those tracks.
Yep.
Roswell line, the only freight train that goes up there would be a diesel train with train tracks on it for maintenance.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the Roroa stockyards haven't been in use since the 70s.
Right.
That was the last freight train that actively used to use the line. And basically it's because we truck our sheep to the stockyards now, not to the meatworks, not send them in by train, which that was how you used to have to do things back in the day. And because of the weird anomaly of that, they had to send it up the Johnsonville line on the train.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it was probably one of the good things that came out of that.
Okay, yep.
Yeah.
All right, so that makes sense.
I think there's a bit more to it. And, I mean, the one thing that frustrated me was how Chris Bishop kept having his hands crossed like that, talking to his speech. What the hell? That, portrays negative balances. But yeah. Well, we can fit Rachel Brooking in. It's only 5 minutes.
Yep.
The list that the Minister just gave out, many of the things, I cannot recite it verbatim, but they are things that I certainly agree with. We should move the system and the resource management system to the plans, to the national instruments, and away from a bespoke consent by consent issue. That is why, of course, we reformed the Resource Management Act over a long period of time and had the Spatial Planning Act and the Natural and Built Environments Act. Both of those acts were repealed last December. And the Minister says with pride, look at all the things we're doing. Look, we've repealed this legislation that fixed an act, the Resource Management Act, that we all agree doesn't work, he says. And then in the next breath, he says, and we've done this fast track bill, which will soon be an act, soon be signed into an act, that railroads over all of the environmental protections. And I heard in that list that we do need to protect the environment, and that is not what the fast track does. And now I realise I'm talking about a different bill. I'm talking about the Resource Management, Consenting and Other System Changes Amendment Bill. And whoever made the snarky little comment over there on the national side, I say to you it's relevant because if you were listening to your minister, you will know that this is a set of different pieces of legislation to replace what we had done and what that government has repealed. And I note, when I was listening to the minister and when I was listening to the Prime Minister in question time, that there's a lot of focus on checklists. And it might be that this piece of legislation, this one in the House today, is only here the week before Christmas to meet that checklist. Because we all know that we were only in the committee stage of that fast track bill last week for hours and hours and hours because it was on that checklist. And we saw those amendments that came in at the very last minutes. And this is a very bad way to make laws. And it seems that the Prime Minister does not understand that fundamental need for laws to be scrutinised. Now, this bill, as we've heard the Minister say, covers a range of different issues. It's not a replacement for the RMA at all. It's not a Natural and Built Environments Act or Spatial Planning Act or what he says might happen next year. It changes rules around fishing with the Matiti decision. It could end up enabling more houses on greenfields as the quid pro quo for not having the NDRS. It is a backtrack on the NDRS. In the last term, National and Labor agreed to have these mixed density residential zones provisions. This national government is backtracking on that by not requiring councils to do it, but making it optional. And that makes all the other discussions, and I'm going to come to this soon, on bipartisanship and working together very difficult when that is the record that we are dealing with. And then there's a change to Section 17. The Minister noted that that links in with our out of scope, in my opinion, change to 107 that came through the last RMA Amendment Bill a month or so ago, a change that was not consulted on, that was not in the bill was introduced, but that some irrigators and others wanted and were able to submit on, but groups like Forest and Bird were stopped from submitting on. And there was a change to that piece of that Section 107, that section, that links with Section 70 here, and there is an opportunity, there would have been an opportunity at this bill, if this government was interested in good faith, proper processes, to have had that Section 107 discussion here, but they haven't done that. There's also changes to farm plan certification that may or may not be beneficial, and of course we've heard that appeal rights for heritage decisions are going to be changed. It doesn't deal with the funding of public infrastructure, which is always the trickiest issue. Yep. It does also work on hazards, compliance, emergency regulations, renewable energy and ports. So I will be asking officials for their advice on comparisons with the Natural and Built Environments Act because it seems that some of those provisions have come from that. On that note, we will be supporting it to Select Committee and we hope that the ministers will ask their members to interrogate it.
Thank you, Mr.
Did he cut her mic?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. Okay. What are your thoughts on she did bring a good point that groups like Forest and Bird were not allowed to submit on this. I thought that was really interesting during the consultation.
Well, they weren't part of the, what do you call it, pre-bill consultation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What did you think about what Rachel had to say overall?
Well, basically what she said sounds like what Nationals been doing the whole time, which is consulting their mates and not consulting the people that won't give them the answers they want to hear.
Yep. Yeah, no, that's bad. If National is preventing other organisations like Forest and Bird from participating in the consultation process, yeah, that's undemocratic.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's get to the fun segment of the bills that you can sit there and submit on over the next week. Next period of time. The employment pay strike deductions for partial strikes amendment bill closes next Thursday, the 30th. I'll be making my submission, and should we just sit there and say a National MP will be used as their example of whether Mike Butterick should have 4 minutes of his pay cut or 10% of his whole fortnight's wages?
Send him a compilation of all the seat warmer speeches.
No, he didn't feature in one this week. Budget policy statement. If you want to stir Nicola Willis up, you can put a submission on here. The offshore renewable energy bill, which we covered earlier tonight, closes on why Taggy Day of all days.
Ugh.
I know. How ironic is that? The broadcasting repeal of advertising restrictions amendment bill closes on the 7th. The resource consenting and other matters changes amendment bill closes on the 10th, the one we've just covered. The crime legislation stalking and harassment amendment bill closes on the 13th. And the crime increased penalty for slavery offences amendment bill closes on the 13th. So those are the bills that are coming up on there. Some news. If you're in Auckland tomorrow, you get to celebrate a public holiday. But I have looked at the Justice Committee. And the interesting thing about the Justice Committee is the fact that they're sitting tomorrow for the Treaty Principles Bill.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll be able to do it. If you want to see Helmut Modlik in there, he's going to be in there.
Nice.
David Seymour starts it off as it usually does with the bill sponsor, or in this case, the minister. Also, there is a section in there, one of the submitters is Paul Goldsmith, which is really interesting. I'm not sure what capacity it will be because he's not the Attorney General, because Jennifer Collins is the Attorney General. So, we will be having a post-show meeting afterwards on deciding what to do with the Treaty Principles Bill. Just to let you know, panellists, we are going to be having panellists back on the show properly from next week. Just because this show and last week's show, we've been covering last year's bills.
Yeah.
Because the MPs aren't back into work until, it's the Justice Select Committee tomorrow, but they're not back into the House properly until Tuesday. And ironically, school kids don't start back at school for another week. And Shortland Street is still 2 weeks away.
Oh, my goodness. Right.
I know. Random piece of facts on there about Shortland Street being 2 weeks away. But, the fact that the MPs this time around are back at work before the school kids, but then they take a week off for Waitangi Day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Not a day off, a week off. But, his choice. So, yes, I hope you do like the our seat warmer compilation videos. They're going to be new features. Typically, the seat warmer speeches we usually call after speech 6. And as you can probably see, some of them were less than a minute long. So, we sit there and do it. Feel free to sit there and share the videos around and all that. And just give an update, we're at 307 subscribers and we're over the 3,000 hours of monetization. So our biggest one is bringing up subscribers. We did have 29 new subscribers pop in over the weekend. Thank you, Kiwi Skirt, for helping boosting that. But we are still quite a fair bit off before we get it on the subscriber levels. At least the good part is our watch hours are remaining consistent, because we're about to have in about 2 days' time a bit of a drop in watch hours because the Hamilton East by-election shows from last year 365 days in 2 days' time. So that's going on there. So we'll be back at 8 p.m. tomorrow. Was it next Sunday, but we may also have a agency show, but that will be something we discuss after we drop from going off live.
Oh, fun. Agency show.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's going to be fun trying to make everything work out because I've got events coming up over the next 2 months for Sundays.
Oh.
And hey, I need the money.
Yeah.
You know, I need the money. Yep. So, yeah, we will see everyone back here at 8 o'clock next week and maybe a bit earlier. Thanks for seeing us on the order paper and It's in the Ballot team. Have a good evening.
Thank you for watching the Order Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa, New Zealand Parliament. To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/it'sintheballot. The Order Paper podcast is brought to you by It's in the Ballot Productions.